ammunition storage facilities going, well, to put it lightly, kaboom, okay? So in Russia, they have a lot of ammunition because their warfare strategy is to pummel the enemy with as much ammunition as possible. And so far, the only way that they've advanced in Ukraine is by blowing up every building in a city, whether it be Popasna, whether it be in Volchansk, whether it be in Bakhmut, whether it be in any of these locations, turning it to rubble, and then taking over the rubble, and then planting a flag in the rubble. And they've done this again and again and again and again and again. Now, this does have the effect of eventually working if the enemy doesn't have enough ammunition to respond with, and the Russians have had an ammunition advantage for most of the war, and it's been quite stark. But it is very resource intensive, and it means you need a lot of ammunition to do it. And so if the Russians were to say, like, lose half their ammunition or something along those lines, that could have a really detrimental effect to their ability to push forward. They'd have to more heavily rely, for example, on infantry assaults that have very high casualties. And when the Russians are already dealing with some level of manpower shortages and doing whatever they can, including making units out of Russian aircraft carriers in order to try to get more infantry out there, including, I don't know if you guys saw this, but Putin signing a new law giving criminal defendants immunity if they join the army, meaning that you go out there, you commit a mugging of some sort, hold a grandma at knife point, you get nicked by the cops, you're in court, you can go to prison or be given a gun. Which one are you going to choose? A lot of them choose a gun. I would say that, you know, somebody robs a grandma, maybe giving them a gun is not the smartest immediate thing to do, but, you know, the Russian army is an army of beggars right now, and beggars cannot be choosers. Anyway, that frees up an additional 20,000 men under investigation to possibly be sent to the front lines. Anyway, they need the ammunition, and they're producing it and investing in more production of ammunition to try to meet the needs for it. They're also pulling in North Korean shells, you know, Iranian ammunition, doing everything they can to try to suck up whatever ammunition is on the market. The problem is, though, they also need to get the ammunition not just to Russia, but into Ukraine. And that requires midway points. See, it's not as simple as the shell gets shipped to Russia, then the shell gets shipped to a unit on the front line. No. It's the logistics would be too crazy if that was the case. Every individual shell, they're shipped in batches, and they're usually shipped to midway points to wait in storage before units need them, and then they ship them out to the local command, which then distributes them to local units. The reason why they do this is while they could send it immediately directly to the front in every case, let's say that the Ukrainians break through, and I know this be crazy, but let's say the Ukrainians decided to invade Russia. Crazy, would never happen. Say like in Kursk, I know a second battle of Kursk, wild to think about, but let's say they broke through there and they quickly needed ammunition to respond. That's going to be a problem if that ammunition's already been passed out to all the boys in the front line. That either means you're going to have to shift the units around, which is going to come with negative effects to where the units already are, and of course they got to reaccommodate it in this new location. But it also means you got to shift the ammunition around. And point is, it's useful to have a certain amount of ammunition in storage at a midway point, so that when a breakthrough or some other requirement means that they need to pull upon a large supply of shells, they can quickly do so, shipping it to the front line. The problem is that while they're in these midway points, they could potentially be targeted. Now, before, at the initial start of the invasion, that might not have been much of a threat because, you know, the Russians were the ones doing the attacking and the Ukrainians were kind of too busy defending everywhere to really think about doing that. And they didn't have drones that could go over 1,000 kilometers. They had like weapons that could at best go 250 kilometers. So a lot of these things were not in range. Now they are, and the war's been going on for 2.5 years, going on 3. And the Ukrainians have every incentive in the world to disable Russia's ammunition stockpiles. And the Russians know that Ukrainian drone ranges have been increasing. So, what do the Russians do? Well, to be blunt, it looks like at many of these ammunition storage facilities, including, I believe it was, God, I can't remember all the names of these different locations, but including in the Tver region. One second, let me get you the exact name of the location. Oh yes, the warehouse in Toropets, and on top of two other locations, that much of this ammunition was being stored outside, as in not in controlled bunkers that were pre-made for this purpose, but just outside in the open air, like it was pre-war. There's a lot of complacency there. You might call it a certain amount of incompetence, but certainly you could use the word complacent. Now, this wasn't the case in every instance. Some of these seem to be getting taken off and put onto a train, and that's part of the reason why the ammunition explosion was so massive, which we're going to look at in a moment. There was stuff stored inside the bunkers that were made for this purpose, but the bunkers also exploded. And you can see that some of the bunkers exploded because you could just see it. These buildings were there, then the buildings were gone. Buildings were there, then the buildings, well, are gone. Buildings are there, that building is gone. There's the train, by the way. Buildings there, buildings gone. Buildings there, buildings gone. Buildings there. Can anyone guess what happens next? A lot of buildings gone. There's some other pictures you can see. Here it is with AP that you can see compare and contrast immediately after these locations. And this was not just one warehouse. This was 3 separate warehouses that created massive, massive, massive fireballs. I don't know if you guys have seen it. One second. Do they show it here? Yes, they do. Here's ABC News Australia to show you the size of these fireballs, which the Estonian Ministry of Defense says that the Toropets fireball potentially destroyed 3 to 4 months of ammunition. Now, I'm going to tell you in a second why I think that's a bunch of hogwash, and I think Estonian intelligence could very likely be wrong. But first, let's show you the fireball, because it is massive.
A large-scale Ukrainian drone attack has struck a large arms depot deep into Russian territory in the Tver region, triggering a massive explosion. Russian authorities have ordered evacuations from the town of Toropets.
You ever heard the term mushroom cloud? That's what a mushroom cloud is. If to give you an idea of the explosion and exactly how big it was, one way you can measure its size is through the earthquake monitoring system, because it picked up 21 earthquakes in the region through these different ammunition explosions. Quite a big one.
The explosion was so powerful it was registered by earthquake sensors and the fireball picked up by satellites. At least 13 people were injured in the attack. A Ukrainian security source says the military depot housed ballistic missiles, explosives, artillery shells, as well as fuel tanks. The latest strike in Russia's Tver region comes after Ukraine sought permission from the US and UK to fire long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. The town of Toropets lies 380 kilometres northwest of Russia's capital, Moscow. Ukrainian president...
Mind you, pre-war, the Ukrainians would not have been able to hit this. The Russians have encouraged Ukrainian military innovation at such a pace that they've been able to go from 250 kilometers to 1,400. That's quite something.
The president has thanked the Ukrainian military and lauded its long-range capabilities.
There is a significant outcome from last night on the territory of Russia, and this is the type of action that weakens the enemy. I thank all those involved. Such inspiring precision. Our special services, the security service, the defence intelligence, the special operations forces. Thank you.
Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin has announced a program to bolster Russia's defence forces. He wants to modernise the army with the new equipment as well as train more troops. Mr. Putin says it's become necessary to use all possible resources.
Okay. First things first. The Estonian report saying 3 to 4 months of ammunition got destroyed here. putting a number on it, I think, is next to impossible. First problem is, if you assume it's all artillery, then maybe you can like measure it by, but it's not as simple as like measuring like a amount of kilotons and dynamite, etc. Because these are probably different types of ammunition. It could be glide bombs, it could be MLRS rockets, it could be artillery, it could be mortars, it could be other types of ammunition. And so they could be North Korean shells. One of the Toropets was a location that many people suspected was a intermediary point between the North Koreans and the Russians for North Korean ammunition on its way to Ukraine. So it could be a lot of North Korean ammunition. And as much as people mock North Korean ammunition, if it explodes, it can kill. And so if it's off the battlefield, the Ukrainians are happy. But trying to measure the exact amount of months and time, I think, is very difficult unless you have some insider information or there's something that the Estonians know that the rest of us don't. So I will call a little bit of hogwash on the Estonian intelligence community for that assessment, because I just don't really think it's feasible to know. It was a sizable explosion. I think you can make the reasonable estimation that if you're coming up on earthquake sensors, you probably blew up a lot of stuff. There have already been reports from Russian military bloggers that this is having an effect on the front line, and Russian soldiers are feeling a bit of ammunition starvation from this. But how much of an effect it's going to have in the long run, and how much that freeze is going to really have an effect, or if it's localized, who knows? And something like this can really only have an effect in the long run if you follow it up, take out more facilities, target production, etc. It's part of the reason why, because when you listen to Ukrainian justifications for them wanting permission on long-range strikes, is they probably want to use, and they've said this openly, I'm going to say probably, we know they want to use, since the 90% of the Russian air power that was in range of these weapons, these Western weapons, have been taken out, the Ukrainians have been building up new targets, and those new targets include ammunition storage facilities. And so I think if the Ukrainians want to follow this up, one way to help follow this up would be an approval of long-range strikes, so they can take out these ammunition storage facilities that are within 300 kilometers of Ukraine. And hey, maybe they don't take out all the ammunition. Maybe they just take out a few facilities, and they don't destroy all the ammunition. That doesn't necessarily mean it's like a pure loss, or it's only a little victory. If you get the Russians to push their ammunition supply further and further and further and further back, that strains the army. It makes the ammunition supply less responsive. It takes more time for it to get there. It'll be a bigger strain on their logistics, and it's a problem. So how did this happen? How did it happen that when the deputy defense minister was talking about at these facilities, I believe it was the Toropets facility and one of the other two, that they were willing to be able to be withstanding nuclear explosions? Atom bombs could drop on this base and we're Gucci. That's how they were pitching it. How did it go from that to a drone with a 20 to 25 pound warhead was able to cause that gigantic of an explosion? Well, number one, it wasn't one drone or two drones, it was a lot of drones. And so they probably hit a lot of different points before getting the secondary explosion. And so they really concentrated a lot of firepower on these places. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, the storage outside and the complacency is definitely a contributing factor. But outside of the complacency, I think there's a chance that this could just be out and about corruption. Look, the person who was making those claims about, how strong these facilities were, that man was eventually let go from his position of service. And I believe, and his job was to manage logistics and such. His job was a logistics guy. He was fired towards the end of 2022 in reference to his poor management of the Russian logistics during the invasion of Ukraine. And earlier this year, he was arrested on corruption charges. Now, I think the weird part of that isn't the corruption, it's the arrest part. But that could be an indicator that what was happening or could have been happening, and this is pure speculation, and I want to acknowledge that, right? I don't want to pretend that I'm some know-it-all and I have all the information here. It could be that these facilities that were made to help store weapons had some money cut from the construction budget and then awarded to the person who was managing the construction budget, or his friends and family, or greedy other individuals that they maybe wanted to give money to. that they could have taken some money off the top and then let the rest of the money do the construction work. And when you look at how these different contractors in occupied Mariupol have operated in doing repairs on civilian housing, it's been terrible, it's been awful, and it's been well documented how they leave leaks, they leave holes in the walls, they don't get the plumbing working, they allow people to be cold in their homes, and it's been going on for years since they've occupied Mariupol. And if we're talking about that when it comes to civilian reconstruction, that's one thing. But if we're talking about that when it comes to, the making of bunkers that are necessary to store Russia's ammunition, that's a totally different story. Let me remind you, NATO's strategy for a war with Russia is long-range strikes, crippling their logistics, targeting their ammunition. If that's the crux of their strategy, and the Russians are cutting corners on the production of these facilities, that's really, really bad for the Russians. And it also could show a moment of weakness. But moment of weakness does not last forever. That complacency about leaving that ammunition outside, that could go away. Okay, a few beatings here, a few beatings there, and they're moving the ammunition real quick. Okay, the complacency could be beaten back. Constructing completely different and new storage facilities, that might be a little bit different. But the longer time that they have, the more that they'll have time to disperse their ammunition storage, so that if an explosion like this happens again in the future, it'll be smaller. That's what the Russians did closer to Ukraine. Once the HIMARS was able to strike into the ammunition depots that Russia was using in occupied Ukraine, they could do that further out. Again, it would strain logistics, but it also could help them preserve the ammunition that they need to win the war, period. And of course, the more time you give them, the more time they have to adjust, which then I think puts more emphasis on Zelensky, who was talking about how they're dragging their feet, literally referring to the dragging of their feet on this issue of long-range Western strikes. When I say Western strikes, as in strikes with Western munitions, ATACMS as example, but you could also have the Storm Shadow or any other number of long-range munitions to fulfill this role here. The longer you wait, the less opportunities that you will have as the Russians correct themselves. And then the longer you wait, the easier it will be for the West to justify not giving the Ukrainians that capability, because as every day passes, the effect it will have lessens. So if they're going to give the long-range strike capability to the Ukrainians, I'm hearing some rumors that they're waiting until after Election Day. The sooner, the better. You know that liquor is the devil's nectar, and that's how he gets inside you.